Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Here we are to guide you through the final session, and I hope you're all awake, excited, because we are. Especially for me, you've heard that I'm the head of research at the Lancet. I know you all read it, and here I am now this afternoon with this panel of experts. We're only doing expert opinion, no randomized controlled trials. I'm not asking for evidence on anything. We're future gazing. So come with us. We're going to have a great time. We're going to be slightly speculative, so don't hold us to what we're saying, but welcome to my panel. I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves before we get started.
Okay, I'm Marc Farr. I'm the Chief Analytical Officer at East Kent Hospitals, and I chair the Kent and Medway STP Analytics Board.
I'm Emma Hughes. I'm Associate Chief Innovation Officer at Alder Children's Hospital, where I lead on the day-to-day of our innovation projects and working on our trust strategy.
I'm Amrita Kumar. I'm a consultant radiologist and AI clinical lead at Frimley Health.
I'm John Parry. I'm Clinical Director at TPP and Clinical Safety Officer for the company.
I'm Fernanda Zaganelli. I'm an ophthalmologist working on projects in Switzerland and Brazil.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Marc, you're next to me. So I'm going to turn to you first. Looking forward 10 years, what would you hope to achieve?
So I'm going to answer it differently to what I thought I was going to answer. So my interests academically are in the study of inequalities and social class, and I would hope that in 10 years we might have wrestled with inequalities, because I think linked to some of the last presentation, you know, people like us are tracking our steps and very good at engaging with technology really quickly, and there is a risk that inequalities continue to widen. There's a promise of AI, if glass is half full, where middle-class women don't have a likelihood to have their breasts reconstructed compared to working-class women who are more likely to have it removed. And that seems to exist at the moment. It exists for a whole range of outcomes, even if you adjust them for late presentation. And I would hope that the research I do will kind of start to address that inequality, start to develop social marketing programs around early screening of certain cancers and so on. So I do a lot of work around linked data sets, working with public health colleagues at the council. But my mission, if I've got one, is around inequalities.
That's such an important problem, and I think we've seen that in lots of, certainly the research which is being published about digital health and AI. What do you think are the kind of main steps then to achieve that aim?
So the point I was going to make before I remembered to talk about inequalities was one about workforce, and I think I would observe that these kind of events serve AI in very specialised clinical areas, because you've got scientists who've got A's at A-level coming through and being interested in things. But the level of analytics about how a hospital runs is quite poor. So I would manage quite a large team, and they are really just counting stuff. Some stuff went up, some stuff went down. That promise of kind of predictive analytics on those walls, it's still fairly rudimentary. I think there's a promise of using AI to analyse those pathways in much better detail. So we still have hospitals with patients in theatres thinking, I don't know what bed this patient's going to be in an hour. And they're surprised when an expected discharge date gets passed. So that analytics about the pathway and developing a workforce that are comfortable with that. So designing, to the question we had here about designing courses in universities, I think you're well served clinically. You know, and everyone's going to talk about imaging the whole time, and we can get robots to read things. The big space for me is that using AI to analyse how a hospital runs. That's the big challenge for me, I think.
Emma, you're nodding.
Yeah, Alder, really, we've taken that approach in that we've not been doing the diagnostic side, that's looking at AI to really understand kind of how the hospital can operate, the efficiencies, and doing things like looking at, obviously, did not attends, and also predicting ED attendance, how that affects the bed flow, but also looking then at the patients that are coming into ED. For example, we're doing a project on asthma mapping. They've had asthma attacks. Where are they actually based, where they live, what are the other kind of socioeconomic factors, and we've been working with our local primary care and CCG, and actually looking at how we would change maybe some of our processes and maybe the operation, how do we put the interventions in other places. That's just an example in ED. Again, we're also doing that within the hospital itself, looking at efficiencies, but also looking at how our patients interact with the service, starting to identify what their needs are, where their questions are, and how would we shift our clinical care to match actually what those patients are asking. And another example of that is we've been using the virtual assistants. So we start to see where it could be a simple issue like patients can't find a particular ward, or they have a particular concern around a blood test or a fracture clinic. But that again gives us real insight into what's going on across the hospital, and how we then can adapt that kind of the operations to meet that patient need.
And obviously you've got a very different population, Emma. If you were kind of future gazing for your population, looking forward 10 years, what would you have the same priority, or what would you mention to?
I think the same, and obviously the children are going to be using this service in the future, and I think for me it's them being able to navigate that service, to easily know what's available to them, how to get the help, the self-help, and to access the system. I also think, it's talked a lot about the diagnostic side, but actually where you take away some of that cognitive load from the clinicians, so the clinicians are still doing their job at the high-level decision-making and care, but actually some of that day-to-day, whether it's help supporting clinical coding, or whether it's taking away telling the patients to bring their pajamas, that's supporting making the system more efficient, but still enabling then the clinicians to do their job and to focus on the important stuff.
And I'm kind of super interested in this idea of the generational difference, as a mother with young children. And then you come across a book and the plot depends on them not having access to a phone. That just is completely lost on them. So do you find that the expectations of your patient population are different?
Yeah, we're quite surprised actually how digitally enabled, even from a very young age now. And obviously we're still trying to provide both, again, going back to kind of the inequalities and making sure that it's access to everybody. But the requests we are getting, the children expect to come in, they want an avatar to take them around the hospital, they want to be able to ask questions 24/7 in whatever means. They don't really want to have to go and find that information, they want it there at the fingertips at the point of need. And that does completely change their access into the NHS.
And I just love the idea that, the expectations of the current population are higher in terms of digital than what we have, but what will the expectations of those children be in 10 years' time? It's incredible. So Amrita, I know that you're kind of more at the front end. What would be your hope that we could have achieved in 10 years looking forward?
Well, I think the way we actually deliver healthcare is going to be completely transformed. In that right now we actually see when patients attend hospitals, it comes very staggered and very episodic and reactive way, whether they're coming in for chest pain or abdomen pain or diabetic, a loss of control which has thrown them out. I think we're actually going to transform that particular route so that we become a lot more continuous and proactive, gauging more towards the preventative and personalized route. So that we can, because currently we have a lot of data that's stored in the hospitals, but they're really unstructured data. What we want to move towards is more structured data that can be used and made so that we can close the gap between data, the knowledge we derive from the data, and then actually utilize that. So we close the gap between the knowledge and the utility as well. And so to that end, one of the projects that we're looking at is actually collaborating with our integrated care system and coming up with the connected care platform that actually integrates the primary care and the secondary care patient data. And then we start looking at risk profiling and preventative measures, looking at diabetes. Can you identify when the patient comes into secondary care that there were risk factors already present while they were in the community at primary care level, and then go a step beyond using AI tools before the patient even possibly knows they have diabetes? These are the things we are looking into.
It's such a positive vision. And in order to achieve that, what do you think are the kind of main tasks that we would need to solve in the next 10 years? Is this about more data, structured data, handling the data differently, something completely different? What are the kind of areas for you that we really need to address?
I think there's a lot, I mean, that's a loaded question, but there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. I mean, on one angle, as a clinician in a hospital setting, the mere fact that right now, all that data, whether it's patient data or imaging data or wearable data, it's all just unstructured, unconnected. I think looking into the future, and it's easy to say, but it's going to be very difficult to do, is how do we line it up so that actually you've lined up longitudinally all the data for that patient, so that from their home with the wearables to all the information in the community with their blood tests, to them attending a hospital episode, you have that kind of longitudinal data collection, how you set up an infrastructure, which is why I think what is happening right now with NHSX and IHI and AAC working together to help both the innovators and the NHS Trust to how are you going to scale this so that it actually works in the future. I think it's very exciting.
Really exciting. Okay, John, let's come to you.
Well, I think we've got two underutilized resources that we need to really mainstream. One is data, and we're all talking about data, and the other is the citizen. We don't have enough doctors, but we do have plenty of patients in this game. I think we've heard a lot today about how data can be used with machine learning or AI techniques to help us either predict diagnoses early or predict better flows of patients through system. But if we go back to the pyramid of care, the challenge of the people at the top with the most demand who are consuming all the resources, but most importantly, the people traveling up the pyramid towards needing more care, we have got to engage the citizen with their data to predict those patients who need the personalized approach that we heard from the Prof a little while ago. And I think that is both a challenge and an enormous opportunity. We can see, as we're linking patient-facing apps or patient-held records directly to their electronic patient record, we can see that we can develop new ways of delivering pathways of care where we energize the patient to make some decisions down a pathway before they need to come back into the clinical arena, but also to help that we ensure that we inform them of what their risks, where they are in the pyramid of care, what they need to do. And we can't do that in our age-old tradition of going to see the GP and us telling patients what they need to do. We've got to abstract it into a system where patients take that, or citizens take their responsibility, and we deliver it to them in a uniform way.
So that's a massive ambition. If you were to kind of lay out a couple of key tasks to get there, what would you be calling on us to do? How do you envisage us getting there?
I think first and foremost, we have to ensure that this is acceptable and palatable to the citizen, because if my crazy idea actually is totally unpalatable, then it will fail. So I think it has to be developed, it has to be thought of, it has to be presented, and it has to be, yes, actually, this is the only way we can keep the NHS doing the fantastic things it does in the acute setting, whilst taking away the things that needs to be done. So we've got to make sure it's acceptable. And I think we have to invest in change. I mean, every clinician knows that they haven't got the headroom to do the change that would really make their life better. So as the Prof said in the previous talk, we need to unlearn stuff, undo stuff, stop doing stuff, because what is the adage? If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got, or whatever. And we're very good at that in the NHS. So we've got to wind back a little bit, take something out of the system, and then focus on the things that we can show will produce benefit.
Right, Marc, you're nodding. Do you think, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, completely. I kind of observe over the last 10 or 20 years, John and I have been sort of old enough to remember some of the debates around, data saves lives. So I will put a tweet out, hashtag data saves lives. By coincidence, it's put out by the Farr Institute, no relation. But we have to be quite bold about that decision and defend it. And I think we're quite timid. And I think the people who are nervous about it and think the NHS should be run by fax machines sometimes have a loud voice. So I think collectively we need to keep publishing examples to say, I've got really rare disease, John's got really rare disease. Why would we not share our data, make our denominator bigger? I'm not selling it to anyone, I'm not giving it to an underwriter. I'm just trying to find out why my back pain has improved and John's has deteriorated and so on. And we just kind of... we both got grey in our beard.
I think it's about 60% of the
Our
population.
spines are crumbling. But that doesn't exist. You know, if I go out looking for information about a laminectomy, I'm kind of looking through Facebook and random forums and YouTube videos. It's not organised well. And I would be well up for sharing that. And the only time I ever got trolled on Twitter was when I deliberately said, I'm a man in his 40s who had an MRI today and I live in TN25. You know, there was some kind of pseudonymized data in there, but I'm relaxed about people knowing about that. It wasn't an embarrassing thing that I'd had done. And, you know, we can make account for those things and hide small numbers and those sorts of things. But, you know, I've got a bad back. If John had a bad back, we might put our data together. It's not... You know, and everyone's like, oh my God, you know, and I'm trying to navigate that for our region through joint data control. We're going to build a new clinical data set where we take all the radiology data, link it, make it available for researchers, all secure, all the IG in place. But we've got to just be really bold about this and do more patient and public engagement. That's kind of...
Go on, Emma, you're with your vulnerable, potentially vulnerable population.
I think the critical part of this is actually having the patients at the centre of this and bringing them on that journey, and that as well as actually the staff of the hospital. I think it'd be, you know, we should be collaborating much more closely with the technology providers. You know, we're lucky in Alder, we have a dedicated innovation centre and innovation team. We're looking actively to collaborate and innovate with partners. And we're on site with the need kind of problem owners. So we run a lot of children forums. You know, a lot of the staff are involved in, you know, problem identification, but also the solution development. And I think that's quite a new thing with the NHS. I think, you know, really to establish the benefits of some of this data sharing and the technology, it's actually collaborating more within the hospital settings and within even the home settings if it's for the healthcare with the patients as well.
Fernanda, let's come to you. So you're going to take us outside the UK. Do you think the challenges are the same? If you were looking into the future, what's your kind of priority for the next 10 years?
Well, I think the challenges are pretty much the same globally. I share this dream, I suppose, that should be organized. The patients should have more access to their own information, and they could have more. They could choose better about their own health. We could also, excuse me. But I think it's important to not only the diagnostic tests or the predictions. There are brilliant apps and brilliant projects around the world, but they have to see each patient as a whole individual, not only skin cancer or an ophthalmologist will see diabetes, but sometimes there's a hemorrhage in the fundus of the eye, but cannot be from diabetes. If the algorithm is not trained to search other diseases, it can give us false diagnostics. So we have to be aware not only about the organization skills, but the complexity there is as we are as individuals.
So your future horizon is a kind of technical one, a clinical one, in that you're hoping that the solutions will move away from kind of diagnosing diabetic retinopathy on images and actually be a more holistic solution.
I think medicine has a lot of potential in AI, not only organization field, but with taking care of the patient the doctor-patient time care. It's a very good point. Like we were talking about the reports, so much time we waste reporting the exams. AI could do this faster and could look at the patient better. So there's a big range for us, and every part of medicine has a very good challenge being proved.
So panel, I'm going to ask you to now do a 180-degree turn, and I'm going to ask you, okay, we've pitched our beautiful sunny horizon, what we're going to achieve in the next 10 years, what the kind of key things that you want solved. Now, imagine a dystopian future. We've had 10 years, we're sitting here, and we haven't got it right. What's happened? Amrita?
I mean, our worst case scenario is that we continue on the trajectory we are if we don't adapt to the evolving AI environment or digitally enabled AI environment. Right now, we know that demands are rising. We have workforce shortages. With the best intention, with the best trained clinicians and all the healthcare staff in the world, you cannot continue the way we are. And I suppose that's the biggest excitement for me, because it doesn't matter which part of the health and care industry you work in, everybody's under the same pressure. Everybody has similar challenges because things aren't necessarily working based on what the past 50 years of healthcare delivery has been. And I think one of the ways to shift that is to now focus on how to solve those problems as opposed to letting the burden of those challenges overbear us. And I think this gives us a very nice way of focusing that energy into something that we could make better. We're very early on in the stage, in my opinion, but the mere fact that we're on the journey, we know what we want our next 10 years to look like. And if we know that, then we're going to make more effort trying to reach there.
Marc, do you agree?
Yeah, no, I completely. I think we could be slow in that argument about data saves lives and still get stuck in it, because we're still stuck in it a little bit. And I worry a little bit about the structure of the market, because I think we're still in a situation where there's quite vested interests, big providers who want to manage the pace of that change along with contracts. So I was talking to a surgeon the other day, and he doesn't like our theatre system, and that's a long, complicated procurement process. What would it be like if he went, well, I don't want to use that one, I'll now use that one, in the same way that I just download another app for my phone? You know, what would that be like if he was buying a theatre system at £2 a month? You know, I've got kids that play for different sports teams, so I've got Teamer, Teamo, and Team. It doesn't really matter, because it's so easy for me to just go pop, pop, pop. I've got access to my electronic record on my phone. That's quite easy now. I can give permission to link it to someone else's. It's coming, but you're fighting quite big giants, and I think there's people who would want to control the pace of that by saying, oh, we're working in AI, we're working in population health management, and so on, but kind of at a pace that suits them, and it's quite difficult to break that, actually.
So when you're looking forward, you're seeing that AI and digital right now, there's a kind of entry point to the market for companies that aren't the typical big giants, unlike when we look at pharma, where for a long time it's been a couple of companies that have kind of led the field. And so I think you're kind of talking about a balance between kind of permitting innovation and reining it back in. Is that correct?
Yeah, and for SMEs, I expect it's cash flow. So, you know, putting stuff out open source, using shared tools, all of that, you'll see lots and lots of pockets of it, but we kind of need that stuff at scale. You get one of these sort of glib conference images of lots and lots of fish that look like a shark, if you know what I mean. You know, they all kind of need to get together to catch the medium-sized fish. And I think there's people trying to control that a little bit, so we need to kind of keep encouraging those little fish to work together.
Emma?
Yeah, I think similarly that, you know, for me it ends up that AI ends up this massive, complex, you know, application, so that it's going to take years and it's never going to get through the regulatory, you know, and then you've still got all the needs and the problems. For me, it's like, you know, ideally trying to find there are deployable interventions you can do today. So it's not making this massive thing that you've got to wait 10 years. Actually start doing so some of these experiments, not, you know, actually what can you do that's safe, with, you know, has patient impact, because there are, you know, there are things you can do today. So for me, it would be the worst thing we could do is wait for the big diagnostic, everything being perfect. That was something we talked about today, and not start using it already.
John?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the R word, which of course is the regulatory aspect of this. And I think we do urgently need to sort out the regulatory aspect. As I said, I'm a clinical safety officer, so as a software company, we have a clinical safety layer that provides an appropriate response. But we're now being overlaid by a medical device regulatory layer, which is going to confuse and take more time for everybody. If we're going to see AI move rapidly, we need to sort that out to start with. So, and the other thing that we talked about, I think we've got I think GDPR is a great thing. It is actually enabling much more data to flow in an appropriate way. That has to be the norm. It's got to be normalized across the whole of the NHS so that we can utilize that data. And I think my third plea is the one thing that may cause this to denature is if we don't continue to value the data quality in all areas of the health service. We have brilliant data from primary care because GPs have been computerized for 40 years. We have excellent data coming, obviously, as the acute and community sectors become computerized. If GPs continue to suffer from the workloads they have, we will see data quality decline. And that then will impede all the other things that will be data-driven, unless we actually preserve that.
So we could have great models, but based on rubbish data.
Exactly.
Fernanda, we'll come to you.
I think the lecture before, he said something very important, that doctors, even though we're reaching something we never imagined in the past, with AI and the future ahead of us, we can never, as physicians, forget how we diagnose all the diseases, how to examine the patient, how to look at the patient. We saw today a brilliant program that could see a person walking and diagnose diseases from it, but we can never lose this eye to our patients, because we're still clinicians and we have to add AI to our knowledge, our practice, and not forget what we already have learned.
I mean, that's such an amazing final word, isn't it, for the contributions of the panel. I think we've just got 2 minutes left, but I would like to take, if we can, maybe one question from the audience. There's one at the back just there.
I'm an ophthalmologist consultant from Brussels. I'm actually using a lot of AI in my clinic. The problem is the economical impact of it, because as clinician we have to see how much all this costs. So I'm not sure if you are able to pay all this technology. Do you have any advice about that?
So is AI more expensive than the status quo, or will it be a cost saving? Your experience is that it's more expensive than the status quo and that we actually can't afford it even if we could develop it. My responses from the panel.
It's interesting because when we set up our AI working group, this is something that we started to explore. You've mentioned financial. There are other costs, non-financial costs that could well be because of reducing the morbidity of the patient, or there are operational efficiencies that in turn do give you a benefit, but not in terms of actually making money. So you have to factor in, you have to think about factoring in the various costs of that particular intervention, and it goes across the spectrum of whether you're looking at a public health intervention or a hospital-based intervention. It'll be more than just financial, but the overall package, whether you call it macroeconomics or microeconomics, will be, hopefully, that's what we're aiming for, that the overall benefit outweighs, the benefit of having the intervention outweighs better than not having the intervention.
But we'd have to stop doing something, initially at least, perhaps, as John says.
I think that's one of the challenges, though, because no one truly knows how to truly evaluate AI and data-driven innovation. There's so many broad, different the health economics that comes into this, and for the patient, for the hospital. That's actually somewhere that I think is a gap at the moment that can be supported, really, is how do we truly evaluate to then justify all of the AI tech.
Can I add something? So as an ophthalmologist, not all devices are our practice is already very expensive, right? All devices we have, all the machines we have are very expensive. But there are technologies coming up that are not as expensive as the real ones. Like in Brazil, three doctors, ophthalmologists, they came up with a device that you can use with a Samsung smartphone. And I've worked in a project where it was used. It's really good. It gives us images from the front of the eye and the back of the eye. It's as perfect as a retinographer, and it works with AI. It's 10 times less expensive than a machine that we use in the office. So not all of the AI devices are more expensive.
So I hear that we're looking to Brazil, basically, to solve some of these problems. Can we take one more question just here? One more? I think we can have one more question.
Thank you. I think it's been a really good day overall, and I think it's really exciting having a look at horizon scanning and what's in the future. But I've worked in countless trusts where we're still working off paper diaries and going to recovery and putting the patient sticker in the notes and that kind of thing. So I kind of understand how AI can, the trusts that have the kind of visibility and be able to use the predictive analytics and embed AI, but you've also got trusts that actually aren't anywhere near that. So one, I think, is, do you think employing AI in those trusts is actually going to widen the inequalities further? And how do we then bring up the lower performing trusts, or those who've got a few more barriers, to then get up to actually a digital maturity that the whole NHS can then be proud of?
Good. What a great question.
It is a very good question. I think personally we can't hold one back because of the other. I think it's a very valid question. There are areas where poor adoption or adoption has not taken place at a fast enough speed. We've got to move forward in the areas we can, but you're absolutely right. We must not leave behind. We must ensure adequate resources and adequate training to bring people on. And I think the two can happen at the same time. We mustn't make them mutually exclusive.
Marc?
I would just be pragmatic. So you can be quite precious about what artificial intelligence means, and so it has to be maths, and there has to be an algorithm, and an agent has to learn, and all of that. But if there's a term that people are getting on, for better or for worse, we might use that to try and speed some of that stuff up. So I was chatting to a dermatologist before here, who's got a great idea where you can take a photo and send it into an EPR or to a GP. It's not really AI, because until you get a load of metadata around it, you have this pretentious argument about what's AI. But I said, do you know what, don't worry about it. It's sort of in a loose AI discussion, and I can take it through my board and get people to concentrate on it. It's close enough, to be honest. So the words, and the thing you said almost alluded to, is augmented intelligence, actually, which is kind of a better term to end on almost. I wouldn't get too worried about it. So if you can use AI as a banner to get some of that stuff, done electronically instead of on paper, don't worry too much if it technically an algorithm's not being built.
So small steps.
Yeah.
So we are definitely now out of time. I'm sure that the panel will be happy for you to approach them and ask them any more questions that you didn't get to ask now. But finally, just please join me in thanking the panel and thanking Fernanda, John, Amrita, Emma, and Marc. So thank you so much.